Hi everyone, Michael from Doing Life Together. Hope you are safe and well. Today and this week, we want to have a look at the big idea, the concept that is self-care, as well as some tools to help us think about this area of our life. Now, self-care is the way that you and I look after ourselves. How we look after ourselves emotionally, physically, socially, spiritually, psychologically, whatever those domains might mean to you in your context, in your story. How do you do that? How do you build those areas of your life day to day? What practices do you use? What tools do you use each day to navigate that part of your life? And self-care is important because not only does it help us feel balanced and ready to connect and ready to grow, ready to thrive, it keeps filling our energy tank, so to speak, to get us ready to go through life, to do this thing we call day-to-day life. When we pay attention to our self-care, when we develop our self-care, when we pay attention to those domains we talked about before, we generally find ourselves in a healthy space to connect, to grow, develop, and we generally find ourselves in a space where we can navigate even some ups and downs, generally in a reasonably okay way. But when we forget about our self-care or don't pay attention to ourselves or don't pay attention to recharging our batteries, refueling our tanks, then all of a sudden, things can burn out pretty quickly. One of the joyful things that we get to do is spend time with community, schools, classrooms, organisations, teams, to talk around this idea of self-care. And we use a couple of analogies or images, metaphors that might help you explore this for yourself. And the first one is the idea of batteries. Batteries are really interesting, aren't they? Because when they first turn up, they're full of excitement, full of power, fully charged, ready to go. You plug them in and boom, whatever you plug them into starts straight away. We can be like that sometimes, depending on what gets us excited, what we're connecting into. Sometimes when we try something new for the first time or something new we haven't tried for a very long time, we come fully charged and we're ready to go. And depending on what size battery we are or what we've put into our battery to recharge or how we've taken care of our batteries, how we've stored our batteries, what we've put into them, how we've looked after them, where we've kept them, all of these things, they will determine how long this battery performs for at its peak performance. But over time, what we know is batteries drain their energy. And over time, whatever appliance they're in, you're going to start to see it perform a little less and a little less and a little less, and it might get a little slower, and it needs you to pay attention to that appliance and go, okay, the batteries need to be changed. And we take the old batteries out and we put new batteries in, and all of a sudden the appliance works and runs again. But if we don't put new batteries in, the appliance burns out and stops working. And on its way to stop working, it can be sluggish and slow, and all sorts of things can go a little bit pear-shaped. Sound familiar? It can be us as well, just like this battery. Now, of course, we don't have batteries that we plug in and take out and have to put new ones in and get rid of the old. But if we think of ourselves as a battery, we have to be thinking about how do we recharge our battery in terms of how much sleep do we have? What tools do we practice? Things like mindfulness, breathing exercises, journaling, gratitude, all these things that help us keep our battery levels at the right space. How do we pay attention to things in our body, things in our minds that tell us when our battery levels are getting too low, when we're having to recharge or when we have to back away from a certain task? That can be really, really important. Now, here's the other thing with batteries, which I find really fascinating. Batteries come in different shapes and sizes. So we have this large D-size battery. Here we have a AA, of course. They are another size that we use. And of course, another common size you'll see is the AAA. But here's the interesting thing. Each of these batteries hold different charges for different purposes. Each of them can do certain things or have a different capacity. And it's really interesting to think about ourselves as human beings in that space. You see, not all of us have the same capacity for certain tasks or certain things that need to be done. Certain things will drain us more than other things, but certain things will fill us more than other things. And that's perfectly okay. That's perfectly normal. That's why we are just so wired to live in connection, in community, because we complement each other in this space. So what does your tank manage? What capacity do you have is a really important question to ask yourself. And then from that, what can you manage? What do you need support with? What's going to be okay? What's going to drain your tank so quickly that maybe you need to avoid it for a while, or maybe you need to find a new way to approach it? So batteries can be a really helpful way to talk around this idea of self-care. The other thing that can be really useful is the idea of a water tank. Now, a water tank, for those of you who might live in regional communities or grew up in regional communities, you understand this, or if you have a water tank in your own home, you need to keep the water tank at the right level. When you do that, the water tastes good, it flows out, it's clean, it's ready to go, the filters work, all of the things that take place in the normal way. But if the tank level drops below certain points, you start to see warning signs that the water doesn't look as clean, or the filter's not working as well as it should, or you're starting to get a different taste in the water. And if it keeps going to a certain level, that's okay. But if it gets lower and lower and lower, eventually it gets so low that all the gunk starts coming up from the bottom of the tank, and the gunk can be not so nice, and it doesn't do great things to your body, and it really turns the taste of the water off what you want to see. Well, this is another really useful image or analogy for us to think about ourselves in the area of self-care. We have to keep our water tanks at the right level. So, we need to know then what fills our tank, what builds that water level up. And we need to build time to practice those things in our daily rhythms of life. We also need to know that constantly there's going to be a drain on our tank. And that's not saying in a bad way, but when we interact with people, it uses some of our energy. When we complete a task, when we have to focus, whatever it might be, we're using something out of our tank. And we need to be aware of what drains our tank. And not just the normal things that drain our tank, but like I said with the battery analogy, there are certain things that will drain my tank more than they'll drain your tank, and vice versa. And so knowing those things are really, really important. And so if I know I have to, today do something that's going to drain my tank more than other things do, then I have to build into my rhythm today more time to fill my tank, extra filling to make sure that extra energy is there to drain. Now, when our water level gets to a certain point, about the halfway mark of the water tank, like I talked about before, the tank starts to change taste. It starts to give us signs that, hey, we need to wake up and pay some attention, start filling the tank, plug up the drain for a little bit so it can recharge itself and get itself ready to go again. Now, that's not going to look like tasting different in your life, but you know the signs we're talking about. When our tank gets to a certain level, that halfway point, we start getting, that little bit angry at times, or we start getting a little bit on edge, or we have some bigger feelings come up, or we struggle to contain those big feelings as well as we did before. Or we might find little things start to annoy us, or we start to feel tired, or there's a whole range of things our body does to say, hey, warning sign, warning sign, warning sign, pay attention, fill your tank, get me recharged because I need that boost. It's so important in the whole idea of self-care that when we hear those warning signs, when we see those warning signs, or when we see them for each other, that we can point those out and we can allow ourselves time to refill or to recharge. Now, if we recharge, then we start to get our tank back up to the right space. But if we don't recharge and we continue to push through, which a lot of us do in life, then the water level drains and drains and drains to a point where it becomes sluggish, gunky, and some really not so nice stuff comes from the bottom of our tanks up into our life, and people experience us in ways that aren't really helpful or kind or friendly. That's when we really need to stop, take time, and to refill that tank with emergency fillers. Fill in all the tanks, all the fire engines, should I say, all the water tanks, the water bombers, bring everything in to fill and fill and fill that tank. But also to seek help when we might need that additional support. The other thing to know is know what your boosters are. So many of us have booster fillers, things we don't get to do all the time, but when we really need to boost our tank, if we give it a crack even for 10 minutes, half an hour, it can bring our water levels way back up really, really quickly. So there you go, two images, two analogies that we find really helpful talking around self-care, the battery and the water tank. What I want you to do this week is take a moment, take a few minutes in the next couple of days to sit down and just think, where are my energy levels at? What is my water tank telling me? What do I need to pay attention to? What's going okay? What do I need to do something about? And over this week, we're going to share a couple of tools that we find helpful to navigate this space. Because our level of self-care, our level of energy, what we have available to give is so important every day for our own well-being and for the well-being of others. Have a great week, folks, and we look forward to connecting with you again real soon.